on this edition of Sightings.
I'm very angry sometimes as the Air Force. I feel like they know more than they're telling us.
He was a World War II hero, but did he die chasing an alien craft?
When this UFO kicked into high gear, the aircraft was ionized.
Then, a sightings update. Some deny it's real, but the mystery continues.
You would probably say this could not have happened, but the photographic evidence proves otherwise.
Plus, an ancient ritual brings a killer face to face with his victim.
The room became very cold, and he became very frightened.
Later, a loving father's final gift saves his family from an icy tomb.
The car was filling up with water very, very fast.
And is Denver's new airport cursed?
There's a possibility that there's something out here.
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. January 7th, 1948, 5 months after the mysterious crash near Roswell, New Mexico, a National Guard pilot on a routine training mission radioed in with a strange message. The pilot, a decorated World War II ace with over 2,800 hours of flight time, told the tower that he was in pursuit of a glowing object he could not identify. Moments later, the pilot, Thomas Mantell, was dead. In 1948, 3 separate UFO sightings that have come to be known as the classics sparked the modern UFO investigation movement. In response to public demand for answers, the U.S. government established Project Sign. Its stated purpose was to scientifically investigate UFO sightings, and among its first commissions was one of the 3 classic cases, the mysterious death of pilot Thomas Mantell. Was the World War II flying ace the world's first UFO fatality?
Tommy was my big brother. He was 3 years older than I. And sort of awesome to me, of course. I remember Tommy mostly interested in airplanes. He made model airplanes and he had them hanging all over his bed.
He wanted to be a fighter pilot so bad, but he was too tall. But then he was very happy when they sent him over to England, and his job was to take the gliders and paratroopers behind the lines. And on D-Day, that's what he did.
On June 6, 1944, Thomas Mantell proved just what kind of a pilot he was. Mantell's top-secret mission was to deliver a glider deep behind enemy lines. Towing the glider behind his unarmed C-24, Mantell came under attack from enemy anti-aircraft fire 100 miles from the drop-off point. The plane was hit, but Mantell kept going and completed his mission, dropping the glider on target. This is what his plane looked like when it landed safely in England. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism and extraordinary achievement in aerial flight.
When he got out of the Army, I was hoping he'd get a regular 9-to-5 job, but he still wanted airplanes, so he started his own flying school. Then he joined the Air National Guard, and he liked that because he got to fly fighter planes in the Air National Guard.
On January 7th, 1948, 6 months after receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross, Captain Mantell died during what should have been a routine training mission.
He and his flight were retrieving some aircraft that had been undergoing overhaul and maintenance down in Marietta, Georgia.
Larry Tabor is an historian and aeronautics expert who's been researching the Mantell case for more than 10 years.
When I got into college, I found out that our squadron at the University of Louisville was named after Thomas Mantell, the Arnold Air Society portion of it. And so I began to do more and more research.
Tabor has amassed hundreds of civilian and military documents related to the curious death of Thomas Mantell.
He was returning from Marietta, Georgia that day with 3 other men in a flight of P-51 fighters. and they were returning to Stanford Field when they received a call from Godman Tire at Fort Knox to pursue an unidentified flying object that had been in the area. One of the airplanes did not participate in the flight because it was short of fuel. The other 3 aircraft continued on, even though 2 of the aircraft, including Mantell's, were not equipped to go at high altitudes. They did see some type of flying object. They chased it for a certain amount of time there in the early afternoon, and they got to about 25,000 feet, and at that point, Mantell's wingman turned back to escort the less experienced pilot down. I, of course, find that strange, since it's the job of a wingman to stay with his flight leader at all times. Mantell chose to continue to chase the object, something that he felt was a threat to the security of America. At some point, Mantell said, "I see the object, I'm going to pursue it a little bit further," and that was the last contact that anybody had with Mantell. He went up to above 33,000, and at that point appears to have died from anoxia or lack of oxygen. The aircraft was continuing its high-power climb. Of course, with Mantell dead, eventually the aircraft heeled over from torque and came down in a spin where it crashed in a field down in Franklin, Kentucky.
We were not told or informed by the Air Force. They wanted to sweep it under the rug with as little attention to themselves as possible, whether it be because they felt they were at fault for sending him, or if it was something they didn't want to talk about, what he was chasing. A neighbor that lived 3 houses down came to our house and told my mother what had happened.
2 neighbors from down the street came in, and they said, "Peggy, we got something we've got to tell you." And of course I had no idea what it was. And they told me, they said, "Tommy's had a crash." And I said, "Oh, is he all right?" And they said, "No, he was killed."
The main thing I recall was standing in my brother's home with his wife, and we were all standing in a circle holding hands, and my mother said, "The circle's broken." And I might say she was broken also.
For nearly 50 years, the family of Thomas Mantell has searched for an explanation. The military's silence has contributed to a flood of contradictory rumors. Mantell's body was found riddled with bullets. The body was missing. The plane had disintegrated. The wreckage was radioactive. And most disturbing of all, that Thomas Mantell's P-51 was knocked down by an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
When we come back, our sightings investigative team returns to the crash site. Remarkably, after nearly 50 years and a thorough military investigation, sightings was still able to find additional pieces of wreckage from Thomas Mantell's P-51.
Coming up next.
He was too good of a pilot to go chasing after something that wasn't there.
As far as a military cover-up, I believe there was.
In 1948, National Guard pilot Thomas Mantell, on a routine training mission, spotted what he believed was a UFO bearing down on him. Moments later, his plane crashed, and from that day to this, his family has never known why.
They've always had the theory. I still hear the Venus theory, and most recently the balloon theory, the top secret balloon that was out at that time.
The Air Force will neither confirm nor deny the existence of a balloon near Godman Field that day. But there is compelling evidence that such a balloon did exist. In the hours before Mantell's UFO sightings and subsequent death, several bases reported seeing a UFO overhead, traveling at 250 miles per hour. One air controller described it as round and white, resembling a parachute.
The Navy Skyhook balloon program was aimed at carrying cosmic ray experiments into the stratosphere, and the January 6, 1948 flight carried instruments, I believe, for the University of Minnesota Physics Department.
Chief Engineer Charles Moore believes that the Skyhook balloon, launched on January 6th, was directly responsible for Thomas Mantell's death on January 7th.
We heard reports of a large white object being seen in the sky over Illinois, and later we heard reports of a similar object being seen over Kentucky, and this was the first time that anyone in the central United States had ever seen such a high-flying balloon.
But there are serious discrepancies between the actual flight pattern of a skyhook balloon and what Thomas Mantell reported seeing. He described an object traveling up and forward as fast as he was, and that the UFO was metallic and of tremendous size.
I do believe, and I always will, that it was a cover-up because they never came to talk to anybody in my family about what had happened. They more or less just let us assume what had happened on our own.
I'm very angry sometimes as the Air Force. I feel like they know more than they're telling us. It's affected my children because they never knew their daddy growing up. They were just children.
I feel that he was intelligent and experienced enough not to have made the mistake of chasing a balloon. On several occasions, he said he couldn't gain on the object. It even appeared to be going faster than he was.
I think it's possible that Captain Mantell did see the balloon and attempt to chase it. I would suspect it would have been high above him so that he had no possibility whatsoever of climbing to the altitude where the balloon was floating, still in the stratosphere.
When I first started doing research many years ago, one of the things that I heard was the fact that the aircraft had small holes in it. It was ionized, and it came about because Captain Mantell had gotten close enough to the exhaust system of whatever type of flying object that it was, and when this UFO kicked into high gear to leave our orbit, he was caught in the exhaust blast.
If Captain Mantell had been caught in a radioactive backwash, the wreckage of his plane would tell the story best. Sightings sent an investigative team to the crash site in Franklin, Kentucky, with the hope that clues to the Mantell mystery might still litter this field. It was the first time the family had been to the crash site.
At the time of the accident, we were not able to come here. They threw security all in the whole area.
Glenn and Anna Margaret Mays were two of the first people on the scene.
I mean, it was like pandemonium, you know, how people just congregating, and it was, you know, the road was full of cars and people were coming.
Mm-hmm. How long did they keep the area blocked off for?
Good while, didn't they,
Okay.
Glenn?
Okay.
Pretty good while.
I don't know exactly how long,
On 2 or
but
3 days, they brought a truck and a dozer down here from Fort Knox and loaded what was left of the plane on a truck and took a dozer and buried, you know,
Right.
That's what we
filled the hole
heard.
up.
We just heard that
Uh-huh.
that
Filled the hole
information
up.
today. No, we heard that.
After 46 years, Glenn Mays thought he remembered the location where the military had buried wreckage from Mantell's plane. After so many years, our team had few expectations, but the family had high hopes.
He's right up in there, bunch of weeds right in there. It's pretty close. Right up in there where them weeds are.
Well, I'm getting some radiation spikes.
There were pockets of high radiation in the field, but when our team began to dig, there were no signs of metal debris.
I sent him back to fetch a picture he has showing where the aircraft crashed. If that can give us perhaps a better determination how far it is from the barn and if the military's records are accurate or not.
Our sightings camera crew matched the angle and the depth of field shown in this old newspaper clipping. It may not have been the most technically sophisticated method the team tried, but it worked.
Yep. Aircraft.
It's green, isn't it?
Yeah, it's chromate green. That's the interior of the aircraft. That's one of the spars. There you go. It's not necessarily all over. It's just like on sections. That's interesting. See? Here it'll spike, but up here it goes back to normal.
In just the few remaining hours of daylight, Larry Tabor and the sightings team found over 24 pieces of wreckage.
Fortunately, there are serial numbers on several pieces of the aircraft that were recovered, and these can be traced to ensure that it did come from the airplane that Captain Mantell was flying that day.
I hope what you all are doing brings to light some of it, because I was hoping before I pass on that I find out what it is.
If this is wreckage from Mantell's plane, Why was it buried in an unmarked trench by the same military that had promised to do a thorough investigation? And why does it refuse to answer the Mantell family's simple plea? What happened to Tommy?
As far as a military cover-up, I believe there was, at that time, very much a cover-up of the whole incident.
To me, that's why there's always been a question. Maybe it was a UFO. How do we know?
He was too good of a pilot to take a risk of his life and to hurt his family, to go chasing after something that wasn't there.
Sightings has notified Air Force officials at the Pentagon that we have found what appears to be wreckage from Thomas Mantell's P-51. Sightings has also requested all information pertaining to this incident under the Freedom of Information Act. We hope to bring you the response to these inquiries on a future broadcast.
Next, a sightings update.
There's clearly a reluctance to acknowledging the probability of spontaneous human combustion because it's so bizarre, it's so weird.
Recently, sightings reported on a controversial phenomenon known as spontaneous human combustion. Victims in England appeared to have been consumed from the inside out by intense, unexplained heat. Since that report, a fire investigator in the United States has come forward with details about SHC cases in Pennsylvania and New York. You will be among the first to see his bizarre photographs of the victims' remains.
If the photographs themselves didn't exist, you would probably say this could not have happened. But the photographic evidence proves otherwise.
What causes these bizarre deaths by fire? Larry Arnold, director of Parascience International, is a leading authority on spontaneous human combustion cases in the United States.
There's clearly a reluctance to acknowledging the probability of spontaneous human combustion in any particular case because it's so bizarre. It's so atypical, it's so weird. That a human body can self-ignite and be burned to ash is just so problematic that psychologically, people in mainstream science just can't come to terms with it.
A recent case in point is this death in New York. The body of a man had turned to ash, while the bed he slept in was largely intact, and there was absolutely no fire or smoke damage to the ceiling directly over the body.
People thought I was crazy when I said SHC, spontaneous human combustion.
Robert Purdy, now retired, was coordinator of emergency services for Essex County, New York, when he was called in to investigate the scene of the unexplained death.
What other logical explanation is there if you know anything about fire at all? If you know that a building burns at 1,500 degrees, if you know you're cremated at 2,300 degrees, and when you're cremated, you have bone particle. There was 2 pieces of bone. The rest was powder. That's spontaneous human combustion in my estimation, or somebody's got to tell me what else did it, and I don't know of anything else.
Fire investigators in Pennsylvania were equally shocked by a similar case of suspected SHC. Henry Lott was the local fire chief at the time of the incident.
The proof of something is in the actually seeing it yourself and being involved in something like this. And this case is a mystery, and I don't think there's anyone who would ever be able to put a label on it one way or the other.
Jack Lotwick is a retired Pennsylvania fire marshal who is searching for a scientific and reproducible reason why some people appear to spontaneously combust.
Facts are so important to us. We have to be able to go into court and articulate what causes this fire. When you get into this realm here, of spontaneous human combustion, it's all guesswork, and nobody's ever successfully explained where all of this intense heat could come from generated within the human body.
The most widely accepted, but still unproved theory about the cause of spontaneous human combustion involves a process known as the candle effect. Researchers believe that fat cells have the potential to fuel an internal human fire that consumes the body from the inside out. But every attempt to duplicate the candle effect under laboratory conditions has failed. No one knows what causes SHC.
And nobody's required to know everything. And I don't know is a good answer sometimes.
If you didn't see it yourself as I saw it, you can't explain it. If I hadn't seen this and you told me it happened, I told you you were crazy. I really would.
Testing to uncover the true nature of spontaneous human combustion is ongoing. Pathologists and fire experts realize that until they can prove the candle effect under controlled laboratory conditions, spontaneous human combustion will remain a mystery.
Coming up, a loving father's final gift saves his family.
The only way that his family was going to make it was if he could be there.
Then, an ancient ritual conjures the ghost of a murder victim. And is Denver's new airport cursed?
We've all heard stories about people who suddenly developed superhuman powers during a moment of great tragedy. The mother who picks up a car to save her child, for example. But where does the power come from? Is it just adrenaline, or could it spring from a more supernatural source? One woman who saved the lives of her children after a terrible accident believes the power came from her dead husband.
Life was good for John and Patty Eggleston and their two boys, Chris and John Jr. But just days after this picture was taken, John was dead. It happened in a split second on the way home from a family ski vacation in Washington State.
Within 5 minutes of leaving the ski area, we hit some black ice, and the car went out of control.
We hit one railing, and then we skidded out of control, and then hit another, and then after a few times, we went over the railing.
While we were airborne, it seemed like it took forever. I had enough time to be really, really afraid.
Their car had skidded, flipped over the bridge's guardrail, and plunged 80 feet into the icy Skykomish River.
When we hit the water, I had a momentary sense of relief until I realized that the car was filling up with water very, very fast.
After the impact, Patty couldn't move. Her feet were trapped by the car's motor.
I finally was able to pull my feet out, and I laid down on the seat, and I put my feet up to the window and kicked it.
With the power she would later describe as otherworldly, Patty began to kick at the window.
I kicked and kicked and kicked. I don't know how many times, but I know I had to kick a lot. I was at a loss. I didn't know what I could do next.
The car was submerged. Hundreds of pounds of water pressure resisted Patty's feeble attempts to free her family from their metal coffin. Then, a strange sensation came over her.
As I put my feet to the window, it seemed like I knew what to do, and I had this incredible feeling come through me that the best thing I can describe is I call it liquefied love.
And then, the window shattered.
I swam out of the car and came up gasping for air, holding onto the ski racks, and my 6-year-old son came bobbing to the surface, and I saw him floating down the river. So I grabbed him and somehow got the two of us up onto the roof of the car, and at that point there wasn't anything else I could do except to scream for help.
From the roof of her car, Patty felt sure her husband was sitting on the bank of the river.
I had this strong sense of him sitting up there on the rocks, and I knew he was okay, and I knew he was sitting there, and I was mad, thinking, John, why aren't you helping me get your kids out of this car?
Stranded in the middle of a freezing river, enveloped by darkness, Patty frantically cried for help. Her son, Chris, was still in the car.
The lights from the car made an eerie glow in the water. The water itself was just glowing in the darkness, and I could see Patty on top of the car.
A man appeared out of nowhere and jumped in the water and swam out to the car, and he said, is anybody left in the car? And I was screaming, yes, my baby, because I knew my husband was okay.
Dennis dove under the frigid water, and after several agonizing minutes, resurfaced with Chris.
He rolled over his head out of the water, and water came out of his mouth. I knew he wasn't breathing at that point for sure.
And my son was trapped in the car for 10 to 15 minutes when the man finally was able to pull him out of the car. And my eyes had adjusted enough that I could see my little 4-year-old was dead.
Dennis brought Chris's lifeless body to shore and tried to revive him. Patty carried John Jr. to shore and collapsed.
Dennis said, he's okay, he's breathing now.
Chris was alive, but the struggle was not yet over. Dennis and Patty had to carry the children up an 80-foot cliff. As they began their climb, Patty felt intense pain. Doctors would later discover that her back was broken in 3 places. When Patty reached the road, she looked down to see where her husband was, but he was nowhere in sight.
It turned out that my husband actually was still in the car. And I was so confused later on when I found that out, because I was so sure that he was up on those rocks watching the whole thing.
An emergency team pulled John from the car and rushed him to the nearest hospital. But it was too late. The official cause of death was listed as drowning.
The state trooper that investigated this accident said, "It is a miracle that the 3 of you are alive. You shouldn't be alive."
It was months before Patty could bring herself to look at photographs taken at the crash site. But when she finally did, Patty had a revelation about why she and the boys had been spared.
I could see right above the steering wheel there was a round fracture in the windshield. And the insurance adjuster said, somebody's head hit that windshield. And I said, oh my God, now I know. I know exactly when he died. And then everything made sense, because everybody was telling me, well, he died and he drowned and all of this. He didn't die in the hospital. His spirit departed his body when I put my feet to the window to kick the window out.
Patty believes that her husband's spirit entered her body at that moment and gave her renewed strength. How else could a woman with a broken back manage to kick out a car window, carry her 50-pound child to shore, and then climb an 80-foot cliff?
So I don't think it's much of a stretch to speculate that perhaps her husband died, and that some of the energy involved in his dying process aided Patty in kicking out the window.
Patty agrees, and also believes that John has made his spirit known in other ways since his death. At the funeral, John appeared to his youngest son, Chris.
Chris pointed up to the flowers and he said, Mom, look at those flowers. My daddy's in those flowers.
Much later, Chris revealed another supernatural consequence of the accident while playing his electronic keyboard.
He was playing with the synthesizer on it, and I was ignoring it, and then I was hearing this hauntingly beautiful music, and I thought, oh, that's really neat. And I said, what song was that? And he said, oh, that's the music I heard in heaven.
It wasn't the first time Chris had described a place he called heaven. Chris said he flew there after the crash.
The water started filling up in the car, and I started flying through this tunnel. It was a rainbow-colored tunnel. At the end of it, there were 2 gates. Went through a gate on the right, and then I saw these flowers.
Chris was describing the classic visions associated with near-death experience. To understand what her son was going through, Patty met with Dr. Melvin Morse, who specializes in the study of near-death experience in children.
Children have extremely simple near-death experiences. They're usually fragments of a powerful experience that they're groping to understand.
Dr. Morse also studied the supposed instances of after-death communication between John Eggleston and his family. He has named the phenomenon parting visions.
Chris is seeing his father's face in the flowers, fits all the criteria of a parting vision. It's vividly real, superimposed over ordinary reality. He got some sort of a message from it, which is easy to understand, and it was clearly a spiritual event.
And Dr. Morse believes that Patty's vision of her husband, safely resting on the rocks, was another example of a parting vision.
There were several occasions where I was very aware of my husband's presence after he died, and I was very upset by those.
These experiences are real. Patty's experience is what set me to writing Parting Visions, because it was for the first time that I personally made the connection between near-death experiences and widow's visions, both of which are well documented in the medical literature, but had always previously been in separate categories.
But Patty believes her husband left more than a parting vision when he died. She believes that John also left a parting energy to save his beloved family.
He knew that the only way that his family was going to make it was if he could be there and help us. And I was badly injured. I couldn't have gotten those boys out of that car without the final gift.
For Patty and her family, after-death communication with John has not been a frightening experience. They feel it has given them a sense of closure and that they now know he is in a safe place.
Next, a sacred ritual forces a murderer to confess.
He confessed to Frank Malloy's spirit, and that was the single most significant thing about that seance.
In 1984, a drug smuggler named Bruce DeMaine was tried and convicted for the murder of his friend, Frank Malloy. The case attracted worldwide media attention. The press flocked to the trial, not because of the heinous nature of the crime or the celebrity of the victim. They came because this was the first time psychic evidence had been upheld in a court of law.
It fell to prosecutors in Tucson, Arizona, to bring a murderer to justice. Frank Malloy had been gunned down in cold blood. The case was cut and dry in many respects. A drug deal, a gun, a dead man. But the case had one strange twist. The prosecution's star witness was the ghost of Frank Malloy.
Frank Malloy was an insurance agent here in Tucson. He got involved in marijuana transactions with a couple of people, including a person by the name of Bruce DeMaine.
Pima County picked one of its sharpest prosecutors, Ken Peasley, for the tricky assignment of proving DeMaine was the murderer.
Ultimately, they had a disagreement over some money that Frank owed Bruce, and Bruce ended up taking him out in the desert and shooting him several times.
A week later, a passerby noticed tennis shoes sticking out of Malloy's shallow grave. Homicide detective Ron Oakes was sent to investigate.
First arriving at the crime scene, I noticed that there was a human body that was partially buried in a state of decomposition. We know from the autopsy that Frank Malloy was shot a number of times. He did not die quickly. He was shot several times in order to stop him from his resisting.
Detective Oakes suspected Bruce DeMaine from the start, but he needed proof. He found that proof when he interviewed psychic Tony Noble, an acquaintance of DeMaine's.
Bruce found out from another friend of mine that I was into readings and I was into supernatural, and I could do clacking, which was pretty much unheard of by a lot of people. And he told me he was having a lot of nightmares and he wanted to get rid of them if I could help him.
In various forms, clacking has been used worldwide for centuries.
I do my clacking with stones, a white one and a black one. And they have to be hard stones because you clack with them in your hands like so. You take them, you go, umgara, 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 and it keeps going and going and going until you feel it.
DeMaine had come to Tony because he believed that he was being haunted. He hoped the clacking would summon the spirit so he could confront it. Also attending the seance was Tony's friend Sharon Fiola.
We were all sitting on the couch. I was in the middle. Sharon was on one side of me and Bruce was on the other side of me. And I started to do my clacking with my stones, and the room became very cold. And I told Bruce, I said, there's someone else here. And he said, well, who is it? And I said, who are you? And he said, my name is Frank Malloy. And I want to ask why I was murdered. For what reason?
At this point in the seance, DeMaine made a startling confession.
Bruce told me to tell Frank that he didn't mean to do it. It was just something that got out of hand. I felt at that point like a hand had grabbed a hold of my arm and held really tight. And Bruce told me that it was because when he was shooting Frank, he grabbed a hold of him on that arm and wouldn't let go. And after the death, they had to pry his fingers off his arm. And the next day I had marks right here, which was very frightening to me.
These bizarre occurrences are not uncommon in seances where clacking is used, according to folklorist Patrick Polk.
There's the idea of a vengeful spirit here. And quite often, certainly in folklore and in numerous world traditions, there's the idea that spirits of murdered individuals, people who died unnatural deaths, wander or can't go to heaven. They're not going to rest until the murder or the wrong has been righted.
Polk believes that it is the sound of the clacking stones that facilitates communication with spirits.
You have clacking, where you're making this monotonous sound, this clacking, this putting you into a space where you communicate with the spirit. And chanting serves really the same purpose, and it's just another sensory means of making that connection, getting into that space where the living can communicate with the dead.
When I first heard about the clacking session and the seance, I think that I was probably not quite sure what to make of it, and whether anybody else in the courtroom believed it or not. One person did, and he was the defendant, Bruce DeMaine. He believed it happened. He talked to the spirit. He confessed to Frank Malloy's spirit, and that was the single most significant thing about that seance.
I don't know why Bruce DeMaine would have made these statements, but I suspect it had to do with a sense of guilt. Because during his seance, he also stated that he was remorseful about taking this person's life.
I would think that what he hoped was, by communicating with Frank Malloy and by actually answering the questions directly about why he did this, and then making admissions about it, that hopefully that Frank Malloy would stop bothering him.
It was my first experience with bringing someone through and having the person that murdered him sitting right next to me.
But would the jury believe that a ghost could make a killer confess?
Well, I always thought that Toni was telling the truth, at least from her point of view. And one of the things that convinced me that she would be persuasive was her talking about information or things that she would have had no way to know about. Those things convinced me that Toni Noble was a witness that I thought that a jury would believe.
And Ken Peasley was right. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder.
I think the psychic evidence was in fact the most significant. The other evidence was really used to corroborate what had taken place during the seance or during the clacking session with Toni Noble.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I can explain everything to you, and I know why it happens. I don't know why it happens. I do not have any idea why it happens, but it does happen.
Bruce DeMaine is currently serving a life sentence for the first-degree murder of Frank Malloy. He is incarcerated at the Arizona State Prison at Florence and will not be eligible for parole until the year 2009.
Coming up, are ancient spirits stopping modern progress?
My people used to say that any of the burial grounds was a place that you never went back to bother.
Denver, Colorado is supposed to have a new international airport by now. The grand opening was scheduled for 1993, but nearly a year and a half later, its doors are still closed. Construction delays, systems malfunctions. Well, that is part of it, but many Denverites believe the real reason that the new airport remains closed is bad karma.
When state officials first announced plans to build Denver International Airport, they dazzled the city with a bold architectural vision. DIA would be America's largest airport, operated with state-of-the-art technology. But 5 years after a promising groundbreaking ceremony, the airport stands empty. Innumerable setbacks have pushed the grand opening back weeks, then months, now years.
The only problem that we have here is technology, modern technology.
Not everyone agrees. Native Americans in the area believe the airport remains closed because of restless spirits.
A long time ago, my people used to say that any of the burial grounds or any of the places where the people were put away was a place that you never went back to bother, anything like that. You know.
Alden Naranjo is a member of the Southern Utes, one of many Native American tribes living in Colorado. When plans were first announced to build the airport, the Southern Utes and other Colorado tribes warned officials about the site they had chosen. Tribal leaders believed that disturbing the land might irreparably disturb their ancestors.
One of the concerns that we have is that possible burial sites or other structures that was out here, or not permanent structures, but like teepee rings and things like that.
According to Naranjo, the Denver International Airport's architectural bow to the teepees that once stood here has not appeased his ancestors' restless spirits, nor have other sincere attempts by DIA officials to sanctify the site.
We hired a Native American on our staff to monitor, to make sure that if anything was found during the excavation of the site, and you have to remember, we moved 110 million cubic yards of soil out here. And so there was the likelihood that we could possibly turn up something.
And even though only arrowheads and other hunting artifacts were unearthed, DIA officials continued to cooperate with tribal leaders.
We did do a private ceremony at the Native Americans' request. Actually, we've done it twice. We did it in '87, and we did it again in October of '91. And we wanted to grant their wishes that in case there were any spirits remaining out here, what they ruled as spirits, that those spirits would be at rest.
But many Native Americans still believe the spirits are not at rest, and that even if DIA does open, it will continue to have problems. Naranjo feels his ancestors will continue to make their presence known.
There's a possibility that there's something out here. You know, my people believe in there's a lot of spirits. You know, there's like right now we're having this wind, you know. Maybe there's a reason for this, you know, the spirits of this, you know. The reason for this day has been like it is today.
Was it just a coincidence that on a perfectly calm day, the wind suddenly whipped up when sightings tried to interview Naranjo, and that the wind died down the moment the interview ended? Native Americans are not the only people who believe the airport is cursed. Experts in the ancient Chinese tradition of feng shui believe that not just the land, but the design of the building itself is the source of the problem.
It's a way of using your built environment to promote harmony in your own life.
Jane Fleming and Wilhelm Hepp are experts in the principles of harmonious design known as feng shui. After examining DIA, they found serious violations of feng shui principles.
It boils down to a conflict between what we would call the white principle and the red principle. The red principle would be the heart energy, spirit energy, and circulation in the human organism. And the white principle is the energy that can either be clarity, purity on one hand, or world stagnation and grief and depression on the other. And what we find here is that there is a total surplus of white energy, most visible in the roof, and it's not balanced by an equal amount of red energy. It creates a lot of tendency to feel heavy, to feel a little depressed.
According to Hepp, there are several other areas where the building should be redesigned. The height of this walkway is out of proportion to its width, and this wall cuts off positive energy flowing from the Rocky Mountains.
They decided to close down the glass, and so you have this feeling of like you're smashing into this dead end.
Although the feng shui tradition is a world apart from the Native American culture in this area, Hepp believes there is a significant connection.
The feng shui aspect of red and white being in conflict can be taken metaphorically between white culture versus native culture. I know other places where things have been built on burial sites or sacred sites or energetic sites of natives, and it never quite works out.
Airport authorities have not heeded the advice of our feng shui experts. No further Native American cleansing rituals have been performed. And at the conclusion of our investigation, the airport remains closed.
If you've had a paranormal experience, call the Sightings Hotline at 1-900-933-SIGHT. That's 1-900-933-7444. Each call 65 cents a minute. Average call lasts 3 minutes. Sightings is also online. Our email address is sightings@aol.com.
Until next time, remember, no mystery is closed to an open mind. For Sightings, I'm Tim White.